Hi everyone, I am back to making Vrchat videos and with better equipment. I have moved from using my laptop for these VR videos into using my new PC. My laptop has the NVIDIA 3060 laptop version with 6GB of VRAM, and my new PC has the Intel B580 which has 12GB of VRAM. I am also using my PC microphone, the Blue Yeti, which is better than what I was using before for VR videos. Anyway, this is kind of just a segue to the topic of the video, which is the Intel B580. It has some rough issues with my VR games. Luckily, I found a good solution, so that's what I'm going to be sharing today. So firstly, we have to go into the history of these cards. Intel released the Alchemist series of the Arc graphics cards in 2022. This was the first time they released a desktop GPU. Intel used the naming scheme Alchemist for this first generation of Intel GPUs, and they offered the A310, A380, A580, A750, and A770. The higher the number, the higher the price and performance. These graphics cards were alright, but didn't quite hit the mark to do much against the NVIDIA AMD empire. Intel did a decent job for their first generation of Arc graphics cards, with only being a bit behind the experienced companies in the market. So the Alchemist series of Intel Arc cards were a bit behind in power, but also the compatibility was kind of all over the place. Some games just sucked, while others ran perfectly great. So Intel kept working on it, and slowly the problems kept getting solved. Intel eventually was getting ready to release the second generation of these Intel Arc cards. This time it is the Battle Mage line. So the two cards being released were the B580 and B570. The B580 is the bigger of the two at $250, and the B580 was $220, with a comparable amount of power for the price. The B580 released in December 2024. The test came in and it beat the NVIDIA 4060 and also had the ray tracing to back it up. The issue for the longest time was that the NVIDIA low-end cards were great at ray tracing but gave a lot less VRAM than AMD cards. VRAM is important for loading in textures and polygons and whatever is in the game really. It is also very important with VR games like Vrchat for loading in player models and maps. AMD cards gave a lot of VRAM and power, yet really fell flat with the ray tracing power and has been pretty mediocre in the race of using AI to upscale and create frames versus NVIDIA or Intel. Either way you go with comparing AMD versus NVIDIA cards, you will always have to sacrifice something, either ray tracing, AI, or VRAM. The Intel B580 was all around great. It had decent ray tracing performance and AI upscaling, and the VRAM was higher than NVIDIA's 4060. It had 12GB of VRAM. Not only that, it was about $100 to $200 cheaper than the NVIDIA 4060. The B580 uses mostly efficiency methods like resizable bar to make it so powerful for the price. So the Intel B580 was an amazing budget card, and it created like a whole shortage. That's how good it was. It was hard to find on eBay at some points, and it was going well over the $250, even going into like $400 territory. Luckily, I got mine the day it came to the Micro Centers that is near me, and it was a Sparkle Arc Intel B580. So this card is great. The compatibility for games, everything has been pretty much fixed and it runs games perfectly, right? Actually, no. Although most games I play run great on this graphics card, VR games do not. I do have to admit that I have taken VR compatibility as sort of granted, but I should have known that regular games kind of take precedence over virtual reality gaming. Making games run well on these new cards is kind of hard because of how much stuff there is to do with graphics cards. You have things like modeling, you have regular games, you have different levels of compatibility that need to be addressed, different eras and everything. So it takes like years and years for all these different things to work with a graphics card because there's so many different things that graphics cards do. So I own a Meta Quest 3. It makes the most sense for me to use, even if I just plug it in wired, despite it being a whole system that I can use on its own. So there is a MetaQuest link app where you can, using a wire, connect to your computer with your Quest headset. The issue is it does not recognize my Intel B580, not at all. So what does it do instead? It uses my integrated graphics on my AMD CPU. Integrated graphics on CPUs are very just not powerful GPU parts inside of CPUs. That functionally means you don't have to use a graphics card to actually use a computer. You can just use the integrated graphics. But these integrated graphics basically suck, so you don't want to use them for gaming mostly. These integrated graphics just don't have that much power, so they're not really good for running games. They don't have that performance. This basically means you can't play VR games with the Intel B580 with a wired connection because you get those issues where you're running integrated graphics, and Vrchat really demands more than that. And the only Vrchat game I play is really Vrchat, and it does have an option to play on desktop. Using this option, it perfectly runs very well on my B580. And what you can do is you can just bypass the Quest app. You can instead use a wireless app to connect the headset to the actual computer. What this is called is virtual desktop. It does cost money. I heard that you want to get the Quest version and not the Steam version. Another issue I did have was that my Wi-Fi was downstairs and I was playing upstairs, and the connection wasn't that great. And this made the game also laggy, and the connection laggy and all that. So what I did was I got another router inside my room, so there's a Wi-Fi connection coming from that, and that makes this wireless connection to my computer very fast. And it's basically like I'm playing wired, but it's actually wireless. And I am technically playing wired as I'm doing this video because I have a wire to charge my Quest battery going into my computer, so it's still wired, but also through a wireless connection. That's also a good wireless connection. So what all this does is it makes my VR experience actually playable, my Vrchat experience, because that's the only VR game I actually play. So this basically made my Vrchat experience run perfectly, and it fixed the issues I had previously. So that is how I fixed the issue of the Intel B580 not supporting VR games. I hope Intel eventually makes this work with the Quest app and give compatibility for Intel cards with that. I know the VR market is relatively small, but it already has a whole Half-Life game on the platform, and VR gaming is pretty much growing very fast. The moral of the story is that virtual reality is still almost DIY in a lot of ways, and it has a lot of issues with compatibility sometimes. I had to get so many third-party bits and pieces and changes to make my Quest 3 work good for Vrchat and making videos inside of Vrchat. Virtual reality is still pretty much in its baby stages, and even after 10 years, it has so much to grow, and maybe it'll get to a point with Quest 4 or Quest 5 where it's actually just plug and play and very easy, right out of the box, with the actual VR headset. Anyway, that's the video. Anyway, that's pretty much the video, so like if you like, dislike, subscribe if you want, and bye.